before law. But in your instance, it cannot be said that you are not accountable due to the position you find yourself in. You are accountable to members or citizens of this country, to your followers, to the youth. And that accountability stems from your position. And that is where I'm going to end this. You may please stand up. Not the court only. Sorry. Maybe I should be clear. Sorry for that. All right. After careful consideration, and I can show you I have done so, free of any interference, this judgment or sentence is the sentence of this court and this court alone. In respect of count 1, you are sentenced to a period of 5 years imprisonment. In respect of count 2, you are sentenced to a period of 2 years imprisonment. In respect of count 3, you are sentenced to 20,000 rand or to undergo 6 months imprisonment. In respect of count 4, you are sentenced to 20,000 rand or to undergo 6 months imprisonment. In respect of count 5, you are sentenced to pay a fine of 20,000 rand or to undergo 6 months imprisonment. In terms of section 280, subsection 2 of Act 51 of 1977, the court orders that the sentence imposed in respect of counts 2, 3, 4, and 5 run concurrent with the sentence imposed in respect of count 1. You may be seated. Thank you.
All right, it doesn't really look great for Malema. And trust me, I'm also not feeling good because I have so much respect for the work that he's done and how far he has come. He has been one of the most resilient, hardworking, and really a servant of the people for the past, I don't know, years, more than a decade, right? The EFF has been growing. And I know young people are fuming in their corners right now. Some of them are actually weeping. I've seen some of them crying. That's how bad it is. I believe and hope that as you file an appeal, you may find favor in the eyes of either the High Court or the Supreme Court or the Constitutional Court, because I know he's not going to let this slide. He will fight until he wins. So let's see. Prayers up for him. Please join everyone who is praying for Julius Malema. I also want you to warn young people, crime does not pay. Okay, what you see going on in Madlanga Commission right now is nothing compared to what's coming in Zim. Guys, rain is going to fall. Criminals are going to be held accountable badly. And by the way, I need also to remind these young boys that I've seen who are moving around under the guise of, oh no, we are anti-presidential, anti-criticism, mafia, gang, whatever the case is. They are moving around Zimbabwe threatening citizens, with death, and they do all manner of things. People are watching. The police are also watching. At the right and forum, they will definitely going to be held accountable. But as you know, this whole CAB3 is getting hot and hot, okay? Because now those that are close to Mnangagwa can see, yeah, guys, Masamba Asiana. I wanted you to listen to the interview that Ziyambi Ziyambi had, because you know that George Charamba had an interview. You also Chris Muchonga came out and tried to strengthen on this, 2030 nonsense, as you heard. But let me tell you this. 2030 will not see the light of day. The Gaza revolution is alive and kicking. You also need to know that this evening, tonight, we are going to be listening to Comrade Knox. They're not playing, they mean business. So listen to Ziyambi Ziyambi's madness.
Violence in parliamentary elections. If you look at our history from 1990, it peaked up in 2008. Even in 2018, the shootings that happened in Harare were not linked to a specific parliamentary election. ZANU-PF had won handsomely. But somebody was saying, presidential elections have won. I'm going into the street, and they caused violence and loss of life and property happened. And then we said, what is the best experience in other countries? We noticed that around 37 out of 58 Commonwealth countries, they do not have direct presidential elections. Botswana, for instance, is considered by those where we borrowed this idea of universal suffrage, one man, one vote. They consider it as one of the best models of democracy in Africa. They have parliamentary elections and indirect presidential elections. In South Africa, the same. So we looked at it and we said, why do we want to perpetuate this toxicity and loss of life when we can have a system that, by the way, which we are using within our own parties, political parties? As ZANU-PF, the Electoral College that elects our president of ZANU-PF are provincial coordinating committee meetings constituted by not more than 200 people. They elect the president of the party by virtue of delegated powers that they got from cells, branches, districts, and then that election is endorsed at Congress. And it happens in more or less all the other political parties. So we are saying, those that are saying you are taking away, and if you belong to a political party, why didn't you change that? Your political party, every member votes. So you can almost see that there are certain individuals who are afraid to say out what they want, and then they pretend that we are taking away one man, one vote. But the system that we are introducing, it will reduce that toxicity and ensure that opportunists do not wake up and say, I've lost a presidential election, when they do not even have members of parliament who have voted for them.
Right. One would argue and question whether this toxicity is in numbers or in the nature of the contestations. Now the question is this: in your view, what is the root cause of the said toxicity, and does the amendment address the toxicity adequately?
The amendment addresses it because from the studies that we did, we do not have widespread killings or beatings in constituency elections. We have had, and this I can give you examples. I've spoken about here in Zimbabwe. In Mozambique, Frelimo had a 2/3 majority. Nobody spoke about it. But there was widespread violence. And I remember there was a television clip where the chairperson of the Independent Commission, people went to a house, dragged her, undressed her, and beat her up. And several people died because of presidential elections. Even if you go and check, you will not have figures of those that were killed because a certain individual lost a constituency. If you go to Tanzania, it happened. It's well documented. Chama Pinduzi won handsomely. But there was lots of violence that was unleashed. Over 100 people, we are told, lost their lives. Even a single life should not be lost. So when we talk of toxicity and that kind of violence, even if we are to lose one life, it should not happen. That's why we said, why are we encumbering ourselves with a system that divides us rather than unite us?
But the bill also makes provision to introduce a 7-year presidential term. Will you walk us through that particular proposal there?
Well, what we observed is that we are a developing country. We have been spending lots of resources in electioneering. If you look as ZANU-PF, our Treasurer General was telling us that we spent over 90 million the past election, and the frequency of the election and the nature of our economy. We then looked at other jurisdictions. Like I said, this bill is born out of the need to, we looked at comparable jurisdiction and we said, what is the best practice that we can get out of this so that we can unite our people, move forward with our agenda, our president's agenda of an upper middle income economy by 2030. How do we make sure that we create that environment? And then we found out that in other countries, they have these longer term longer tenures that allow for more stability. If I lose an election today, I do not continuously visit that constituency if I know that elections will be after 7 years. What has been obtaining is that if I lose an election, I'll probably wait for 1 or a year or no 2. After that, I'll start doing some activities, and that kind of destabilizes the sitting MP. And we said, we want a sitting MP to come up with programs that can be completed without having to watch their back to say, somebody now is camped into my constituents. And we looked at other jurisdictions and we felt that it's a tenure that will allow individuals to clearly do the projects that they promised at election time.
We seem to be seeking to have those terms increased at a time where other countries are seeking to actually reduce some of those terms. What's the logic there?
There are very few countries that are reducing. In fact, I can tell you that I was reading yesterday, Uganda, they want to do the same. Gabon, there are several African countries. In fact, I will give you an example that Rwanda, for instance, several African countries, we go to visit Rwanda to study their system, and we say it's a model of development. Rwanda, they increased to 7 years. So we do not follow the flock when it's not applicable to us, but we study with a view of improving our situations. So we did a study and we felt that given our scenario, the savings that we make by increasing the cycles, and we plow that into development, would actually help our people more than sticking to short-term electoral cycles. The US is a bigger economy, they can afford that.
You mentioned the aspect of some of the countries that you did make reference of that have increased. These seem to be more of prone to cause the likes of Cameroon, the likes of Gabon, and several other countries within that particular jurisdiction that has actually worked out in a negative format rather than in a positive. What guarantee is there that this would guarantee stability for Zimbabwe?
Say for Gabon, I think the others have been very stable for a very long time. Uganda has been a stable democracy for a long time. Even in Cameroon, what they term instability is because the leader there was liked by his people and they stayed in power for a long time. That's the only thing that I can make out of it.
Right, let's continue with the conversation and looking at some of the aspects. There is also a legal battle, or debate rather, emerging around Section 328 of the Constitution, particularly on whether these proposed changes trigger the need for a national referendum, especially where term limits and tenure are affected. Why does government believe that a referendum is not required in this particular case?
Perhaps I should have asked, why are they saying a referendum is required? A referendum is required in terms of Section 328, subsection 6, when we are doing 3 things. Amending Chapter 4. I want to repeat. It says amending Chapter 4. Not what you perceive Chapter 4 to mean. So if you go to Chapter 4, and I want to remove a comma, technically I should take that to a referendum. If I'm not touching Chapter 4, the Constitution says you are okay. And it says if you also touch Chapter 16 on agricultural land, come back to us. Before I move further, I must say that those that are talking about the referendum, the people gave us conditions on when we should go back to them when we passed this Constitution. And those are the scenarios. They said, if you want to touch Chapter 4, come back to us. If you want to touch Chapter 16, come back to us. If you want to change the section that is telling you on how to amend the Constitution, which is Section 328, come back to us. So we didn't touch anything on Chapter 4. We didn't touch anything on Chapter 16 on agricultural land. We didn't amend Section 328. On the extension of the term, the Constitution does not even say if we want 3 terms, we need a referendum. It simply says the incumbent will not benefit. But we are not increasing the terms from 2 to 3. So I don't know where they are getting it that the incumbent should not benefit. Because the terms are still 2. We have not increased them. And in any event, even if we had said we wanted a 3rd term, it does not trigger a referendum. It only says, Pachikaranga abika hajke. Saka ndikabika sadza racho ndonza haudye. It only says you can't benefit, but it doesn't say go for a referendum. That's what it says.
Right. I will make reference again to the Section 328, subsection 7, which you just alluded to now. It is quite specific and argues that the amendments of the term limits must not benefit the incumbent, as you pointed out. And yet critiques still contend that the manner in which amendments are being made or adjustments are being made seem to be benefiting the incumbent. May you bring clarity there, line upon line, where the Constitution is concerned?
The Constitution does not say every amendment that you do must not benefit an incumbent. It says if you want to change the term limit provision. So what they are doing is they are neglecting to state that it's speaking about terms. It says if you want to change the term limit provision, the effect of it is want to increase the terms, the incumbent will not benefit. We are not changing the term limits provision. I always give an example that if, for instance, the Minister of Education decides that the first term will, instead of ending on the 5th of April, decides that it will end on the 30th of April. When learners open the following term, is it now a 3rd term? It's still a 2nd term. They'll say, we are now opening a 2nd term. If the minister decides even to shorten it and say you are now closing on the 5th of March, when they open, it's still the 2nd term. So the president won't be subjected to another election, so that we trigger the provisions of Section 91, which says that for you to be president, you must not have served 2 terms. If you serve 2 terms, you can't be president. That's the only section that is a term limit provision, Section 91, in the whole Constitution pertaining to the president. It says if you want to be subjected to an election, you want your name to be included, one of the qualifying conditions is you must not have served 2 terms. And then it clarifies. It says for the provision of this, for the purposes of this Constitution, a term means 3 or more years. It doesn't give an upper limit of what a term is. It says 3 or more years. So we are not triggering it because the president is not subjecting himself to any election in 2030.
Before we move on to the next subject, perhaps to make a follow-up to your earlier session around the subject of universal suffrage, critics still contend that this would be a means of concentrating power and robbing the masses of their power to directly influence presidential candidature.
How, if I may ask, can you explain how they are saying that we are robbing the masses of Oh.
Very simply this. You mentioned earlier on that with the whole concept of having individuals voting for a presidential candidate of their choice, they would simply get into the ballot box and get the ballot, and then they select the specific candidate that they want. But in this particular case, it's a whole different ball game. It's now an indirect channel or means of that, which some would argue would be subject to some elements of manipulation by a select few.
Let me explain it by saying this. There is no presidential candidate that is selected by the majority of the people. It's a political party system that puts forward in all the countries world over. So even if I am to accept your argument, the candidature of our president was a candidature of ZANU-PF. So if you are not ZANU-PF, why do you want to elect him directly when you don't want to be part of his party? World over, political parties have conventions where they have their own methods of selecting the leaders that they will put forward for election as presidential candidates, be it directly or indirectly. We have not had in the history of this world a president or a president who has been elected as an independent without a political party. I do not know of that. That's the reason why I said, if you look at our political systems, electoral systems, political parties, they elect leaders. In fact, the whole basis of an election is to delegate your authority of doing something to another individual to act on your behalf. So the electoral systems world over, you have people who have delegated authority as delegates, be it to Congress, if we are talking about ZANU-PF, or Parliament as an electoral college. Then you elect the leader. That is what happens across the world. In fact, I can put it to you that if you go into this constitution, it even says judicial authority is derived from the people. How is it derived? Because of elected executive members who then now have the authority to appoint. But the primary authority was derived from the people. So this idea of sweetening it and trying to create new definitions, it's a Zimbabwean concept of trying to come up with a new definition of what one man, one vote is. But universal suffrage means everyone is given the same opportunity without discrimination. In other words, if we say we are voting for MPs, each and every person who is eligible to vote must vote for his or her own MP. Then we are equal. We have realized universal suffrage.
Right, voter registration and management of the voters' roll will now be under the Registrar General. Why the shift?
It actually makes sense. It's a consensus. Firstly, let me say, this was a consensus in Parliament when we were debating amendments to the Electoral Act. In fact, if you go and check in the answered, Honorable Wende actually brought amendments to the Electoral Act where he was proposing that the voters' roll and its management be returned back to the Registrar General. You recall that before this constitution came into effect, the Registrar General was responsible for the voters' roll and its maintenance. And back then, the reason why we could not do it is because the voters' roll is mentioned in the constitution that the Zimbabwe Electoral Commission is the custodian of the voters' roll. It will maintain it. And then I indicated to Honorable Wende and members of Parliament that if we are to do that, we then need to amend the constitution, because we cannot have an act of Parliament that is not consistent with the provisions of the constitution. So that was the genesis of how we came about it. And I recall when we were debating, I said, but during COPAC, your party was very passionate about moving the voters' roll from the Registrar General. And they all in unison said, no, it was targeted at Vamdede. We just hated the man and we wanted to take it away from him, but it's not practical. Why do we want it there? The Registrar General is the custodian of all our vital registration information. When you are born, the Registrar General gives you a birth certificate. When you grow up and you want a national identity card, they will give you. If you decide to marry, they will give you a marriage certificate. If you feel you want to see what happens outside our borders, they will give you a passport. And when you die, they issue a death certificate. So they are with you from cradle to the grave. All your information, your addresses, so they are better placed. If you are now 18, they can simply write to you to say, we notice you are now 18, you qualify to vote. Is this your address? Or they can find ways. It makes it much easier. If you are deceased, automatically you are removed from the voters' roll because they are the custodians. And also what is critical also to appreciate is we will not have two separate systems that do more or less the same. The system that the Registrar General has is actually a mirror of what ZEC had, save that ZEC didn't have the vital registration information for everyone. They only had information for those that were registered to vote. But once you are deceased, they needed the Registrar General to clean up their voters' roll. So we're doing it more or less working twice. When we can integrate into their system and they produce the voters' roll, which the electoral body can use.
I've got to jump in there. Does this not expose the electoral process to elements of manipulation and maybe the emergence of ghost voters, as some allege?
In fact, the opposite is true, because ZEC does not have mechanism of identifying a fake ID. They have to run it through the Registrar General's office. So the people who are able to capture a fake voter or duplicate IDs is the Registrar General. So we actually have a more credible voters' roll because they are the custodians. They can actually, even if you have 20 Ndlovus, they will be able to match and say this belongs to this, it will exclude it if it does not, it's not there in their system. And they are able also to match even using your fingerprints. So it will actually make it more credible than what it is now.
Right, there's been contention around the disbanding of the Gender Commission and placing its functions under the Zimbabwe Human Rights Commission. What is the rationale there?
Firstly, let me state that all our independent commissioners are not the functionaries. Commissioners guide in terms of policy making of the work of the commission. Then beyond that, we have the executive secretary and technical staff. Then coming to the substantive issue, the Gender Commission deals with gender issues, not women issues, gender equality issues, which generally are human rights issues. Our thinking is, let's transfer the staff within the Gender Commission. We abolish the commissioners, have a leaner commission with a directorate of gender that will be well resourced and strengthened to deal with gender issues within the ambit of a human rights commission, because these are rights issues. It has nothing, it has no sinister motive of demeaning women. In fact, in my view, it will strengthen the role of ensuring that gender equality issues are dealt with.
How so?
because we have a directorate within the umbrella body that deals directly with human rights. In other jurisdictions, in fact, if you go and look at it, gender issues are rights issues. And if you have a directorate that specifically deals with that, within a one-stop shop, it's better than fragmenting it. In fact, if I digress, we've done it. Yeah, we fragmented ZESA. It was a terrible experiment. Now we said, let's bundle it back and have a one-stop shop where we know that it's within the same management group. So we want to make it leaner but more effective.
Right. If the bill sails through, how will it fundamentally reshape Zimbabwe's governance architecture as well as the relationship between citizens and the state?
I think if the bill sails through, it will bring a lot of stability to our country. In fact, I believe that it will also strengthen the party political system. Our constitution, our electoral system are political party-based. It's a whipping system. And what this will do is it will actually give more power to political parties to be able to organize and contest as a political party to present somebody as their presidential candidate once the electoral process is concluded, just like what happens in other countries. So it doesn't focus attention on a specific individual during the electoral process. It will be about the political ideology of a grouping of a people without necessarily focusing on an individual. I think His Excellency's mantra will actually be captured well, that as a group, as a people, we must determine our destiny in this regard. And the other issue also, like I said, it will reduce incidences of opportunist. You see, when we went for elections in 2018, we had around 23 presidential candidates. Some without even a single MP that is contesting for them. Some is indicating that they are independent. So you see, we had created a scenario which encumbered us with useless individuals on the ballot paper. And this will improve the way we hold our elections.
You started by talking about chiefs when we got into this very conversation and their significance from a traditional perspective. And yet, CAB3 proposes to allow them to be politically polarized. Do you not think that would reverse the traditional standpoint and the value that the chiefs have in this country?
First, the amendment is not saying anything about chiefs. Rather, it's removing a clause that denies them a political right. But what we are doing is we are not directing them to be political, but we are saying as individuals leading their people, that's politics. Any leader of a community is a politician. When this country was liberated, chiefs played a crucial role in making sure that our people supported the liberation struggle. In some instances, we had chiefs that formed political parties. So the idea that chiefs should not be involved, should they wish, is alien to us. Chiefs are politicians by nature, because you can't govern people when you are not involved in the political activities of your community. They make rules on what to do. They do rally people to go to war. The first Chimurenga, chiefs were involved, guided by spirit mediums who would direct that, no, don't go and attack today, ceasefire, advance, guiding the chiefs. So I am not sure where the idea, in fact, it was alien and offensive to our chiefs. And we decided, let's remove it, and we become silent about them, so that the chiefs themselves as individuals, they decide what they want to do.
Minister, moving on to another subject, does Zimbabwe really need a delimitation commission? On the one hand, we say we are streamlining these commissions, and yet we are setting up another commission. Is that justified?
In fact, Zimbabwe definitely needs a delimitation commission, but it's when it was captured in the bill, we incorrectly captured it as a Zimbabwe Electoral Delimitation Commission. It's supposed to be a delimitation commission. If you look at it now, we have several growth points that technically now are supposed to be towns, and certain towns that should be delimited and become cities. We had done away with that. So we are saying the major function of this is to delimit even provinces and towns and cities. If you look at it now, we're in the middle of coming up with a new city that will take up a part of Mashonaland West, part of Mash Central, to become the new city where Parliament is. We need a delimitation commission to do that and be able now to produce a report and the president to then gazette that particular city according to its boundaries.
Is a delimitation not guided perhaps by a census, which has a frequency of about 10 years or so? So between one census and the other, what will they be busy with?
The modalities, in fact, what we did when we introduced it in the Constitution, we never indicated whether it will be full-time or part-time. After the Constitution has been passed, then we'll come up with a delimitation act that will govern now. It will define now how it's structured, the chairman and other people that will constitute the commission, whether it will be full-time or part-time. I get your point. But at this juncture, the idea is to make provision for it and indicate that we need to have a delimitation commission. And secondly, before I forget, the other rationale is after the delimitation that happened the last time, there were so many contestations. In fact, in Parliament, across the divide, members of Parliament were unhappy with that report. Delimitation was done by the Electoral Board. The very participants in an election that is going to be supervised by the Electoral Board were unhappy. So there was going to be residual issues that were going to be carried out to an election that would affect some of the participants in the delimitation commission. So our rationale is, let's have a standalone delimitation commission. Issues of delimitation would then not be carried over into an election, because these ones, they don't have anything with an election that would then follow. So that was part of the reasons why we decided to say, let's have a standalone delimitation commission.
Right. As we round up, you mentioned an era with the proposed bill. Are we likely to see changes where some of the provisions are concerned, against the backdrop of consultations and public hearings that have taken place since this very CAB3 was put forward?
Precisely. That's the purpose of consultations and the debate in Parliament.
Will the changes be fundamental?
I cannot preempt, because I will present the bill and then they present their report and debates will happen. So when you are going through the reports and the debates, it's very possible that you can pick something that is fundamentally important that needs an amendment. And I'm allowed to then concede and say, okay, we'll bring in amendments to correct that or to add something. So we do it quite often, where be it ordinary bills or even the Constitution, to say that when debate is going on, you can actually pick that this is very much correct. We overlooked this, so let's introduce amendments to correct it. That's the purpose of the debate in Parliament. It's not cast in stone. And under normal circumstances, rarely do we have a bill that is passed in the format in which it was introduced in the House. There will be changes because of the consultations and the debates and the input from members of Parliament, we always make changes to the bills.
Minister, thank you for...
It's clear the sender no longer hold, but that's what happened when you play with evil. Sin and crime doesn't pay, brothers and sisters. Chamakajiga chopfuka, Maria Magatora is needed by its people. Barukuchema vana vasingende kuchikoro, makapama drugs. Right, my roads are functional, no electricity, no clean water. It's time for you to pay for your sins. Don't be fooled. These guys are having sleepless nights. Because if they were this comfortable and act as if nothing's happening, they wouldn't be having interviews almost each and every minute, trying to save the CAB3 that is flopped, even during the consultation. It's time. Guys, I know some of you are worried that where am I? No, I'm around. I'm here. Subscribe to the channel. Make sure you ring the bell as well. Share with others in different groups. I'm here. Now I'm here in full force. Every day, we are going to be playing together because things are getting hotter and hotter. Comrade Knox will give you more in detail. I love you guys. Bless you and bless Zimbabwe. Bye for now.